Hello, welcome back to Dinosaurs. Second to last class. We're almost through, so just keep it going, keep it going. We're almost there. Today we're going to talk about Gondwanan sites, Gondwanan dinosaur sites. So these are the sites where we can find dinosaur fossils on the southern continents. We talked about Eurasian sites last time and North American sites before that. And then on Friday, we're going to finish up with dinosaurs in pop culture. And then that's going to be the end. So I know this semester has been pretty crazy, and thanks for hanging in there. We're almost done. Before we get into today's lecture, though, some announcements. Go over the study guides from all the previous modules, all the previous study topics. Some of the questions are probably going to feel pretty similar there. Hint, hint, a lot of them are probably going to be pretty similar. And with that said, let's go ahead and get into today. So let's review what we talked about last time. So why are there so few European Triassic dinosaur sites, and even fewer than that in Asia? So I think I talked a little bit about it was a lot harder to put that lecture together than it was to put the North American dinosaur sites lecture together. Why are there so few good Triassic aged dinosaur sites in Europe and especially in Asia? All right, and the answer is that, so dinosaurs originate in South America. So at this time in Gondwana here, dinosaurs originate somewhere in this kind of neighborhood, either in what becomes South America or what becomes Africa, and they sort of radiate outward from that. So first into North America, so like the Ghost Ranch site that we talked about, and then up along North America, they cross into Europe. So there are some dinosaurs that make it that far in Europe. And then getting into Asia is much more difficult. It takes a lot longer. There's just fewer of them there because it's farther away from where the dinosaurs originate. There are dinosaurs that make it there, though, and that's good because the continents start breaking apart later on in the Triassic, and they start sort of freely floating away from each other, and that isolation breeds sort of uniqueness in the fauna and sort of their own individual evolutionary histories from that point forward. What was Europe like throughout most of the Mesozoic? So I showed you a little bit on that prior picture there where Europe was sort of the gateway into Asia at the beginning. But then what kind of happens throughout most of the Mesozoic? You see here the very complicated topography of Europe and the extremely complicated geology of Europe. All these different colors are different geologic formations. All right, so eventually Europe becomes a series of islands, a series of archipelagos. So today Europe is a continent, so it's dry terrestrial land that the dinosaurs would probably really like living on. However, during most of the Mesozoic, it's really only these highlands that's exposed, and a lot of the big basins like the Parisian Basin and some of these other sedimentary basins here are actually underwater. And so these provide barriers to the dinosaurs moving because dinosaurs probably were capable of swimming, at least to some degree, and they probably did do it like we see in a lot of modern mammals, but they probably weren't great swimmers, and so it was definitely a restriction. And so it provided a barrier to dinosaur migration. So let's look at Gondwana. So we're going to talk about Gondwanan dinosaur sites today. So what does Gondwana mean? So this is a paleogeography map of what things look like in the very beginning of the Cretaceous. So remember, at the end of the Paleozoic, Pangaea is assembled. All of the continents of Earth smashed together to make the supercontinent Pangaea. The Oswego is here, the little yellow star, or hereabouts. It's really tough to find exactly where, but somewhere in there. There's this big old mountain range here. The Appalachians at the time are Himalaya scale mountains, as North America is colliding with what eventually becomes Africa and what eventually becomes South America, and what eventually becomes Scandinavia and Europe, this massive mountain chain here, the Appalachians and the Caledonides. So that's what's happening in the Triassic. On land, dinosaurs are originating somewhere in either South America or Africa. That's where we find the earliest dinosaur fossils, some of which we'll talk about today. Then they radiate outward from there, and we see in North America at the Triassic Ghost Ranch site, through North America, up through Europe, which isn't quite an archipelago yet, but you see it trending that way, and then into Asia. We eventually see dinosaurs able to cross a land bridge from Asia into North America this way, as the continents get further apart. But for right now, this is Pangea, but you see it's already starting to split apart. North America, Europe, and Asia are starting to drift away. And so South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia, these southern continents are together known as Gondwana. The northern continents are known as Laurasia, and eventually that splits into North America and Eurasia, and eventually it's recognized as Europe and Asia individually, the modern continents, although Eurasia is essentially still one continent. We just sort of artificially split it up. So that's Gondwana. We're going to be focusing on these southern continents, and you're going to notice that the faunas are quite different from the North American faunas and the Asian faunas that we talked about before. So one of the most obvious differences is there's some dinosaur clades that are missing. So again, as Pangea breaks up, the dinosaurs evolve differently in different places, and different groups of dinosaurs become dominant in different areas at different times. And so the great dinosaur diversity that we saw in North America and Asia, we really don't see as many different types of dinosaurs. Now, that's not to say that Gondwana didn't have a wide dinosaur diversity. It definitely did. But I guess the amount of different body forms that were around was less. So what's not here? What's not in Gondwana? There are very few, if any, ceratopsian dinosaurs in Gondwana in the southern continents. There's a few reports scattered here and there, usually from very limited material. In most cases, it turns out that it's not actually ceratopsian, or it's only speculatively ceratopsian. The ceratopsians, most famous Triceratops, they're really a North American and Asian fauna. Same thing with the Tyrannosauridae. The large tyrannosaurids, like Tyrannosaurus rex, for example, are prominent in North America and prominent in Asia in the late Cretaceous. And remember, by the late Cretaceous, the continents are split apart, starting to very much resemble the modern configuration. Tyrannosaurids are, again, not present in the Gondwanan continents. There are some scattered reports of material, but again, it's usually speculative based on very little stuff. Same thing with pachycephalosaurs. Pachycephalosaurs are not found on Gondwana. And then the hadrosaur dinosaurs, not either. So in North America and Asia, we see sort of the sauropod dinosaurs, the long-necked, big herbivorous dinosaurs, very dominant in the Jurassic. But as we move into the Cretaceous, the hadrosaurs really start kind of taking over that mantle. Not that sauropods disappear completely, because they're there until the end, but the hadrosaurs really start kind of outcompeting them, and there's less and less sauropods and more hadrosaurs in North America and Asia. But that trend that never really happens in the southern continents. The sauropods are sort of dominant all the way until the end. We don't have the big ceratopsian herbivores. We don't have the big hadrosaur herbivores. We don't have the smaller pachycephalosaur herbivores. And so the sauropods just sort of remain the dominant herbivores. And again, this is all due to plate tectonics. The dinosaurs evolved differently to different environments at different times on different continents. So let's start in the Triassic of South America. So this is one of the earliest places where we find any evidence of dinosaurs whatsoever. So we talked about Ghost Ranch in North America, the coelophysids, Dilophosaurids that we saw there. This is even earlier than that. So this is late Triassic outcrops in northwestern Argentina. It's actually classified as a World Heritage Site because of all of the different dinosaur fauna and early Triassic, well, I should say late Triassic, early Mesozoic fauna that are present. And again, there was that big mass extinction at the end of the Permian, the Great Dying. This Triassic is sort of defined initially by the survivors from that. And as we talked about earlier, the crocodilomorphs, the pseudosuchians, those walk-in crocs, they're really dominant throughout here. But This Ischigualasto Provincial Park is actually set up to protect this fossil heritage here. So all of these bone beds, these essential look into the Triassic history, is actually protected. Ischigualasto is kind of a mouthful. It translates to place where the moon alights. So it probably just looks pretty magnificent in the moonlight. Again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. These kind of arid badland landscapes. Not my cup of tea. I prefer a little bit more green, but they are beautiful in their own way, and definitely the name sort of reflects that. So where are we here? Here's a map of South America, so kind of sticking down here. We're in this neighborhood here. And you see, again, this Badlands topography. You see the flat layers, sedimentary rocks. You also see the reddish tinge, terrestrial sedimentary rocks. Again, a thing that we've seen quite commonly. Not that dinosaur bones are always found in these arid badland areas, but these arid badland areas provide massive exposures. They're not covered in the green vegetation that I think is so cool. When I'm doing geology work, I curse the green vegetation because I can't find rocks. The rocks are covered in vegetation. If you go out west, they're not. If you go to South America in this Badlands area, they're not. And that's why we find a lot of dinosaur material here, because it's relatively hard to find dinosaur fossils. If you're looking for dinosaurs, you need a lot of rock exposed to really increase your chances of rolling those dice and finding that jackpot find. So that's what it looks like today. What did it look like in the past? In the past, this arid Badlands landscape wasn't quite so arid and badlandsy. It was good lands. It was dominated by fluvial, so river, channel sandstones. Again, if you go to a modern river, the modern river has carved down into the surrounding landscape. It makes a channel form. It makes a kind of lens-shaped divot, and it's filled in with coarser material that the river deposits as it's moving along. We can see that in the rock record. We can see these channels, and they're filled with sand. And outside of that channel, on the overbank, is the floodplain muds. And so we recognize these things in the rocks here. We also see a strong seasonal rainfall variation. How can we recognize that? Well, again, you kind of see a cyclicity of this sedimentation here. And the Ischigualasto Formation is deposited in an area of Triassic rifting. This is something that we saw in North America with the Newark Basin in southern New York. These Triassic sediments are preserved because they were downdropped as Pangea was rifting apart, as Pangea was diverging apart. These basins downdropped, sediment infilled, and dinosaurs lived in here. One really cool aspect of this is that this formation actually records the time interval of the Carnian pluvial event. If you remember back to the Mesozoic world lecture and some of the other lectures after that, this Carnian pluvial event is really a shift from, it's the start of the shift from the really hot, dry, early Triassic Pangea to the continents are starting to split apart. It's still pretty hot, but it's not as hot. And it starts also getting more humid and more rainy. And this favors the dinosaurs, and it kind of doesn't favor those walk-in croc pseudosuchians quite as much. And so the dinosaurs are able to start diversifying. They aren't at their peak yet, but they start diversifying. We start seeing more dinosaurs and less of the pseudosuchians. And then they finally go extinct at the late Triassic. And then the dinosaurs then kind of explode in diversity and body size into the Jurassic. But again, how do we know this? How do we know what the weather was like all the way back in the Triassic? How do we know what that paleo environment was like? We can see these delta sandstones. We can see sandstones from rivers kind of emptying into still water, losing their energy. Present is the key to the past. The kind of shapes that we see on modern deltas, we see in ancient deltas. The only difference is that in the modern delta, it's soft sediment, and here it's been lithified into rock, but the shapes are there. Those diagnostic shapes, the diagnostic grain sizes, diagnostic fossils tell us where we are. And then you see this transition into offshore shales. Shale is mud finer grained material, we've transitioned from the delta into deeper water, into deeper calm water, and the grain size has dropped. Again, it's like being a forensic scientist. If you know how to read the rocks and you know what to look for, you can reconstruct the whodunit and the energy of the system and really kind of put it back together. And then we make these maps and we gain knowledge of this ancient environment that's long gone, in addition to learning about who's living there. So let's look at the fauna here. There's these, the first thing that jumps out when I see this are these big dicynodont herbivores. So these are sort of survivors, not necessarily these exact ones, but dicynodont herbivores like Lystrosaurus were dominant after the Great Dying. They were the big herbivores left over. Some of the larger carnivores present in here are Saurosuchus. That's one of the walk-in crocs. We've got some big phytosaurs here that are stalking in the shallow waters. And then we've got some adosaurids. So these are these herbivorous crocodiles. And then we have some amphibians. We've got some very basal dinosaurs though. So dinosaurs are starting to show up here. So we've got Eoraptor, the basal sauropod. So again, when we think of sauropods, we think of the big four-legged sauropods. The early basal forms were bipedal. They weren't herbivores either. They were omnivores. In fact, Panphagia, another one of these basal dinosaurs, it's called Panphagia, all-eater, because it's an omnivore. We're seeing that shift away from pure carnivory towards omnivory and eventually to herbivory in these basal forms, or at least some of these basal forms, because Herrerasaurus is a carnivore. This is probably the largest dinosaur around at this time. Again, later on, we start getting Plateosaurus and some of the other dinosaurs that we talked about later. And then eventually we get up into Dilophosaurus, which is probably the first time that a dinosaur was an apex predator in its environment. At this time, though, Saurosuchus is probably the apex predator, and the phytosaurs are also stalking the water. So dinosaurs have competition. There's still not a lot of dinosaurs around, and they have to compete with these other animals. It's not until the Carnian pluvial event starts favoring dinosaurs and not favoring these crocodiles, and then the end Triassic does them in, that dinosaurs really start diversifying and growing in body size. But you know, not a lot of dinosaurs are not the dominant fauna here. They're kind of bit players in the shadows, obviously very important and very charismatic bit players, but they're not the stars of the show. They're not the primary herbivores. They're not the primary carnivores yet. As we get into the Candeleros Formation, so the Candeleros Formation, we're going to kind of skip the Jurassic essentially entirely, at least for South America, and we're going to go right into the Cretaceous, right into late Cretaceous. I didn't find a lot of information on Jurassic rocks in South America, and I suspect that there's just not a lot preserved there. I'll have to kind of revisit that with a little bit more research in the future, but for now, let's not talk about it. We will look at one example though a bit later on. But late Cretaceous outcrops in the Neuquén Basin of Patagonia in Argentina. So again, South America is here, the Andean margin over here, Patagonia down here into Argentina. We've got the Andean volcanic arc to the west, and at this latitude, the prevailing winds are from the west. And so the winds are bringing moisture off of the Pacific here, hitting the mountains, lifting up the mountains, raining out onto the west side of the mountains, and then there's no water left for the interior. And so we get this rain shadow here. We get this rain shadow with very arid conditions, and so you see kind of what the Candeleros area looks like today. Very arid, not really badlands, but drier conditions. And again, we see, oh look, our good friends, the sandstones, red sandstones, red terrestrial, fluvial river sandstones. This is what you look for when you're looking for dinosaurs. Large areas of exposed terrestrial rock. that is Mesozoic in age, and you're probably going to find dinosaur material. And another thing about this basin is this is another one of those down drop basins, thick sediments depositing here. In some of the older, deeper rocks, there's extensive oil exploration. We'll talk more about that in a couple of slides from now, but the older, deeper units of this basin are prolific hydrocarbon units. Not these because they outcrop at the surface. Any oil and gas that they did have would have leaked out as these were exposed at the surface, and there's that the trap for oil and gas is broken, and they would kind of leak out, like similar to like kind of like the La Brea tar pits today. That's like oil and gas actively escaping, or like the Canadian tar sands is oil and gas actively escaping. There's the deeper rocks in this basin have oil and gas traps, but this doesn't. The trap would be breached as the erosion exposed these units. So that's what it looks like today. What did it look like in the past? We can see here the Candeleros Formation. We have this just stack of sandstones. It's very coarse material, very coarse gravel. And again, grain size is one of those indicators that geologists use. Really big grain size like gravel and pebbles and cobbles indicates higher energy. This is a high energy river system being fed by material from these uplifted volcanic highlands that eventually become the Andes Mountains. We've also got some faulting on the north and south to kind of funnel this material. We start with kind of braided river systems. There's some occasional desert dunes. So just like today, when it's in a rain shadow and it's kind of arid, it's a little bit arid sometimes here as well. And then some siltier, lower energy swamps at times, but mostly it's these coarse river gravels and sands. And it's all inputting that material into this river system here. This is kind of the modern day configuration, but it's not all that different from what it was before. The Candeleros was once considered part of the Rio Lame Formation. That's now been elevated to a group. And you can see Candeleros here as part of that group. The overlying Huancul Formation is also part of the subgroup. We're going to talk about that group or that formation next. So we're going to talk about the older Candeleros. The older rocks are on the bottom, younger rocks stack up on top, like pages in a novel. And we're going to talk about this formation that we're going to kind of visit here. This is what it sort of looked like, sort of this dry-ish, very coarse-grained alluvial plain, and it supported a pretty diverse dinosaur fauna. So who was there? Mostly sauropods, so it was a really diverse sauropod fauna. Lots of different kinds of sauropods of all different sizes, and really different levels of development as well. And if you've got large herbivorous dinosaurs, there's kind of that arms race with the carnivores, and we also get large carnivorous dinosaurs. So probably the two most famous examples of dinosaurs from these formations is Andysaurus, this large sauropod dinosaur in green here. You see it like reconstructed in life here. These other two really big sauropods are known only from footprints. So they may in fact just be Andysaurs. We don't have bones, we only have footprints, but they're speculated to be different species, but we don't have bone material yet. So maybe eventually, again, it's really hard to find dinosaur fossils. The chance that any given dinosaur is fossilized is pretty small. The chance that we actually discover that is even smaller, and the chance that we actually work it and publish it and classify it is even smaller than that. So it takes a lot for these dinosaurs to make it into the scientific literature. And so Andysaurus has made it, and we still know less about these. Andysaurus is a fairly large sauropod dinosaur, and it's being stalked and hunted by Giganotosaurus. So superficially, this is a T-Rex on top, and this is a Giganotosaurus down on the bottom here. Superficially, they look pretty similar. And again, this is an example of convergent evolution. In North America, the herbivores are getting bigger, and the carnivores get bigger in response until eventually they evolve towards Tyrannosaurus is sort of the apex predator there at the end of the Cretaceous. Very large-bodied carnivorous dinosaur, carnivorous Saurosaur, the hollow-boned ancestors of the birds. This is Giganotosaur, and it looks sort of superficially familiar. There's some differences, though. You see the body's not quite as thick. There's some differences in the hip structure. If you look at the hands, Tyrannosaurus has 2 fingers and also a slightly more reduced arm. You still see that in Giganotosaurus as well. Again, probably convergent evolution towards putting more energy and more material in the skull and the jaw versus the arms. We see a lot of these carnivorous dinosaurs reducing their forelimb size. But we got 3 fingers on the reduced forelimb versus only 2. And then if you look at the skull, there's some pretty obvious differences in the skull structure and particularly in the teeth. Tyrannosaurus is famous for its big kind of dagger-shaped or banana-like teeth. And this is a carcharodontid, so it's one of those shark-toothed dinosaurs. Superficially similar due to convergent evolution. They're filling a same role, and so the similar body style is beneficial in both cases, but they're very distantly related from each other. They're both theropods, and the similarities kind of stop at that. Again, this convergent evolution. Again, you see also that they're pretty similar in size. We see that a lot of these very large carnivorous theropod dinosaurs sort of converge on this same body size. Is it the maximum possible body size of a bipedal carnivorous dinosaur? Probably. If not, there'd be a lot of forms that are still bigger still. Spinosaurus was probably a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, certainly. It wasn't really probably a macro predator, though. It's probably more like a piscivore eating fish. So these are 2 of the largest dinosaur-eating dinosaurs of all time, and which one actually is biggest is up for debate. But you see Giganotosaurus versus Andysaurus. It's a pretty fair fight here, and there's pretty good evidence that they were predator-prey relationship preserved in the fossil record. And so you've also got some pterosaurs here, some smaller dinosaurs, and some crocodilomorphs as well. But by this point, the tables have turned, and the crocodilomorphs and eventually modern crocodiles are much smaller compared to dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are now apex. They're filling the large herbivorous roles, they're filling large carnivorous roles, and they're filling a lot of the roles in between. Dinosaurs are now dominating, obviously, by the time we get to the Cretaceous. So that's the Candeleros Formation. We're now going to look at the strata that are like immediately above it, the Huinco Formation. So what does that look like today? Well, again, it's late Cretaceous in age. It's above the Candeleros, so it's very slightly younger. Only a couple million years really difference between them. We're going to see that they're pretty similar to each other, but they're a little bit different. And so remember that not all dinosaurs are present in all places at all times. And so as we move up through the strata, the dinosaurs that we see are going to change, and the dinosaurs that are filling those roles are going to change. The dinosaur groups are probably not going to change too much, but the individual species is going to change quite a lot. And that's what we kind of see here. Very similar conditions to the Candeleros. We've still got that uplifted highland to the west. We're still flushing sediment into the basin, and we still have sort of these stream deposits, but very slightly different. And again, one of the things that's really cool about this Neuquén Basin is that it's an active area of shale gas exploration and production in the older, deeper units. Vaca Muerta, translates to dead cow, is one of the largest shale gas exploration fields in the modern world. So like the Marcellus Shale of the United States is another one of these big shale gas plays. There's a lot of controversy around this. They drill straight down and then they start going horizontal, pump a lot of fluid and a lot of sand into the fractures to kind of prop them open. It's the hydrofracking. And then we produce this gas from the shales. You can see that, they have to clear these pads. They have to make these roads. They have to bring in a lot of water. There's not a lot of water in this area, so water usage is another thing. The water that goes down into the ground comes back up, and so it has to be stored as wastewater. How we store this wastewater can in some cases be problematic. One thing you might hear about hydrofracking, especially if you watch like Gasland, is like the lighting the local water on fire. There's several layers of steel and cement that isolate these wells from the groundwater. If a well is done right, you won't pollute the groundwater from the well. Now, all this other stuff on the surface is problematic, but from the well itself, unless there's a problem, and obviously sometimes there is, but really the problems with hydrofracking isn't so much directly polluting the groundwater from the well itself, but from all these other activities that are going on, all the different land use that's going on, and it's really dramatically alters the landscape. And especially in areas like this where there's not a lot of water around, especially if there's local populations, you're diverting that water from local irrigation, local consumption to pumping down the water, and then it comes up polluted and unusable. And then what do you do with that waste? How do you store it? And so there's definitely a lot of ways that hydraulic fracking is problematic, and we certainly need to have a discussion about whether we should continue doing it. It is a source of a lot of natural gas production, though, which is taking coal plants offline. One of the very few ways we've actually taken steps to address global warming is by switching from coal to natural gas, made possible by hydraulic fracking. So in many ways, it's problematic, and it is still burning fossil fuels, but it sort of moved us away from the even more intense fossil fuels. So again, this is kind of a trade-off, and I don't want to get too far into it, but just so you have a little bit of background here, and it's going to be an issue going forward. So I'd like to just expose you to it at least a little bit here. I have feelings on it, but I won't express them. Anyway, going back to the past, what it was like in the past. So a little bit more arid than the underlying Candeleros. So instead of like this braided mountain streams, we start seeing like a little bit more ephemeral and seasonal streams where they're kind of not always there. Maybe like a little bit more flashy, so a little bit more flash flood deposits. And then initially down, we see kind of this transition from like the lower units into the higher units where we have kind of red sands at the bottom, high subsidence rates, so the basin is dropping quickly. There's a lot of sediment going in and filling in that basin. We see channel sands and floodplains. And then as we go up, the basin sort of fills in. We see lower dropping in the basin, lower sediment supply. The channels really kind of start stacking on top of each other. And we also see that they're sort of bleached. So instead of being this reddish color, you start seeing kind of this whitish color. That's bleaching from fluids moving through these rocks. They probably started red, and then the materials were bleached. You can actually kind of see flow paths along in the rock where those materials are moving through. So again, just like, you don't need to remember the details as geology. I just want you to know that those are the kind of things that we can look for. Those are the kind of things that we can use to reconstruct the past. So what were the dinosaurs like in this formation? Again, pretty similar to the Candeleros. They're not separated by very much time. Very much a sauropod-dominated fauna, but the players have changed. So instead of Andysaurus, we have the much larger Argentinosaurus. Again, Argentinosaurus is one of the candidates for largest land animal of all time. The sauropods also start kind of converging on this same sort of size. Again, probably the maximum upper limit for a quadrupedal herbivorous dinosaur. So probably pushing the limits here. There's a lot of big sauropods that are about the same size. Argentinosaurus is a candidate for the biggest. It's known from a lot of material, but femur is one of the most important bones that you can have to reconstruct the size, and we definitely have the femur of Argentinosaurus and some of the vertebrae. And so we have to extrapolate all of the other size dimensions from that, which can be problematic. And that's another reason why there's so much uncertainty about which is actually the largest sauropod dinosaur. But if we look at some of the other sauropods, and again, think about like the niche diversification going on here. how do all these large sauropods coexist? Their neck heights are at different heights. They're eating different levels in the canopy. They're eating different things at different heights, and so they're not competing directly with each other. Chocanosaurus is a lot closer in size to Andysaurus, so you just see how much bigger Argentinosaurus is than Andysaurus was. And so South America is known for these incredibly large sauropod dinosaurs. And again, this is the Cretaceous. In North America, the sauropods by this time are sort of being phased out. We start seeing ceratopsians, we start seeing hadrosaurs. To a lesser extent, we start seeing the pachycephalosaurs, and some of the other herbivorous dinosaurs like the ankylosaurids kind of move in and fill some of those roles. Don't really see that here in South America. The sauropods remain dominant. These big titanosaur sauropods are dominant in the southern continents all the way through basically to the end, and that's a little bit different from what we see in North America and in Asia. Also, the carnivorous dinosaur kind of switches over as well. Giganotosaurus is gone. It's gone extinct. Why? Well, who knows? These things seem to have like a 2 to 4 million kind of year run built in, maybe because of the changing conditions. But Mapusaurus is essentially very similar in size, but now it's probably not taking on Argentinosaurus. You can see that Chocansaurus is of a pretty similar size, and so they're probably on the menu here, but Argentinosaurus is just so massive. Maybe the young, weak, old individuals, but a full adult Argentinosaurus is far too much for any carnivorous dinosaur to take on. It's just a massive, massive animal. And just so powerful, and you have to respect the tail, you have to respect the neck, you probably even have to respect getting kicked by this thing or stepped on. It's the defenses of the sheer size alone. Now we're going to talk about the Tendaguru Formation. So we're going to shift continents here. We're not going to talk about any Jurassic rocks on South America. This is a Jurassic age in Africa. And so again, we're talking about the Gondwanan continents, South America, Africa. We're going to talk about Antarctica and Australia. India and Madagascar are also kind of thrown in the mix, although I didn't include any of that in today. But we did talk about like Majungasaurus, for example, from India, and some of the other dinosaurs from India and Madagascar, but not really major components. So Tendaguru Formation is late Jurassic to early Cretaceous in age. In the Mandawa Basin of Tanzania. So here's Africa, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Lake Victoria, Malawi, Tanganyika, the East African Rift Valley here. Africa is literally splitting apart. And in this area here, Tendaguru, it's a very rich fossiliferous area. There's multiple different layers of dinosaur beds that are found in here. This area in the modern day of Tanzania is a little bit more humid than the savannas that are found up here. So like the Serengeti, very famous, and then also to the highlands to the west, actually in the rift system itself. One thing that's, again, very notable about Tendaguru, we talked about that earlier in the class. There were 250 tons of material that were removed from here by the German expeditions. A lot of that material is on display in the Berlin Museum now. From 1909 to 1912, German expeditions came in when this was a colony. And so again, this is an example of the colonial era or imperialist era of paleontology. Swoop in, gather the material, most of the hard work done by locals, most of the skilled, educated paleontology done by Europeans, very little knowledge transfer, very little skill building in the local population. And so there's this history of pretty exploitative practices and really kind of stripping the area of its natural heritage, its natural resource. These dinosaur bones are one of a kind material. They can't be replaced. once they're gone, they're gone. And so there's, again, sort of this movement to repatriate some of this stuff and bring it back to where it came from, and really start incorporating locals into ongoing work in the areas. Yes, it's okay to bring in Western knowledge and modern paleontological techniques, but we need to build that expertise in the local area as well. They work with these rocks, they know these rocks, they can contribute to the teams, and a lot of countries now have in place where it's required that you work with locals. In the past year, Tendaguru was subtropical hot humid seashore with kind of more arid lands inland, kind of a coastal plain, some tidal influence. There's even evidence of a tsunami that came through in one of the beds. Another thing that's interesting is it also contains some mammaliform fossils, so some early mammals in here, in addition to its rich dinosaur fauna. So what is that rich dinosaur fauna? Well, it's very similar to the Morrison Formation. So the Morrison Formation in Western North America, you got Stegosaurus, you got Brachiosaurus, you got Allosaurus. Pretty similar here, except instead of Stegosaurus, we have Kentrosaurus with the kind of a little bit spikier versus the plates of Stegosaurus. And we also have those shoulder spikes. Instead of Brachiosaurus, we have the much larger Giraffatitan. And instead of Allosaurus, we have Ceratosaurus with the kind of bumpy nose here. And so again, we see like convergent evolution working to fill these different roles, but it's different dinosaur species that are filling the roles on different continents at different times. Now moving into the Chemcam group. So the Chemcam group outcrops in modern day Morocco, and it's late Cretaceous in age. So now we're moving towards the end of the Mesozoic, along the foothills of the Atlas Mountains. So the Atlas Mountains are here, again, sort of a remnant of the collision to make Pangea. The Chemcam beds outcrop here in the foothills. Again, you see a pretty arid area here in the rain shadow of the Atlas Mountains. Not really a lot of work's been done in this area because it's just very harsh conditions. And so again, a lot of these areas that we're talking about now in Gondwana, these are ripe opportunities for future dinosaur work. There's 2 centuries worth of dinosaur work done in North America, and to a lesser extent in Europe, not because we had less runtime, but just because there's less outcrop there. These areas haven't been worked as much, and they haven't really been worked to the degree that they probably should be, given their richness. And so we're going to start seeing kind of more and more discoveries coming out of here, and discoveries like these. So what did the Chemcam group look like in the past? Well, it was a coastal river system. And again, we see these delta forms. And then gradually that kind of classic sandy river channel systems into river delta systems, it sort of becomes kind of more and more marine over time, and eventually into a Sabkha environment, which is sort of a coastal, very arid, where the coast is evaporating. And so we get some limestones. We also see, again, conglomeratic river channels and sandy deltas. And one thing that's cool about this is it's sometimes been referred to as the most dangerous place in Earth's history. If we look at all the critters that are around in the Chemcam beds, we've got Spinosaurus aegypticus, one of the largest carnivores of all time, but again, probably more interested in fish than in dinosaurs. We just got a lot of these very large dinosaurs. We've also got crocodilomorphs in the water. We've also got pterosaurs in the air, lots of things that are trying to eat everything. In fact, if we look at the dinosaurs and just the fauna in general, almost all, with a couple exceptions here, so Egyptosaurus and Rebeccasaurus are 2 kind of larger sauropod dinosaurs, herbivores. Really, I think all the rest here are carnivores. So this is weird. This is sort of unexpected. How can all of these carnivores exist in the same time, in the same place? We talked about niche partitioning. This is not niche partitioning. What's going on here? Well, Spinosaurus is hunting in the water, so it's probably not really competing with these things directly, but how are all of these other different dinosaurs sustaining themselves? Well, one proposal is that they actually didn't all exist at the same time. So a lot of these dinosaurs are known from their teeth, and the teeth are kind of transported over time. And they get kind of mixed together in the rock and fossil record. And so it kind of ends up looking like they're from the same time, but they're really not. So like think about like a modern beach, megalosaur teeth of the extinct shark that went extinct about 4 million years ago. Sometimes those megalosaur teeth wash out onto the modern beach. If we were to see that in the geologic past, we might think, oh, wow, that's cool. Megalosaur existed longer than we thought, but it's just kind of reworking of those beds. And so it sort of artificially makes it look like all these things work together. Another idea is that they were all sort of fishing, and so they weren't sustaining themselves on herbivorous dinosaurs, which were apparently scarce. They were sustaining themselves on fish, even the non-Spinosaurus dinosaurs. Or we just haven't found the herbivorous dinosaurs yet. Now let's talk about the Antarctic dinosaurs. So again, Antarctica is one of these Gondwanan continents. It rifted away from the rest of Gondwana in the early Jurassic, so it's been a while. Antarctica was still very far south, but right now Antarctica is literally as far south as you can get. It's at the South Pole. It was farther north than that. It was still very far south, though. It was still at the Antarctic Circle. But remember that the climate was a lot warmer than it is today. There were still seasons, but the like north-south temperature gradient was a lot lower than it is, and so the climate was kind of temperate, but it was still highly seasonal. So it probably did snow. It definitely had like a fall. So dinosaurs were living in this cold environment. What we saw with some of the Asian dinosaurs that lived farther north is they adapted to the cold with feathers. Maybe these dinosaurs did that as well. Cryolophosaurus is one of the more famous ones. Probably a Dilophosaurid, Antarctopelta, a Nodosaur, another unique discovery from here. You see there's not really a lot though. It's really hard work to find dinosaurs in Antarctica. And because of all the glaciation that's happening there, all the freeze thaw, a lot of the material that's there is very broken, and it's really hard to kind of put the story together. And then the last slide, we're going to talk about Australian dinosaurs. So Antarctica was here. Again, the South Pole was here. Antarctic Circle was here. So Antarctica was a little farther north than it is now. Australia was farther south than it is now. And so it should have been colder, but remember the climate in general is warmer at this time. The Dinosaur Cove area here has a lot of dinosaur discoveries in there. Again, pretty broken, pretty scattered stuff. One interpreted as a ceratopsian, which would be pretty cool because it would be the only Gondwanan, or one of the only Gondwanan ceratopsians. It's recently been reworked and probably not actually a ceratopsian. Same thing with allosaurids. Oh, allosaurids are a North American, Asian kind of thing. Nope, it's actually probably a Megaraptor. Australovenator is probably what it is. You see that, so it's one of the Megaraptors, not an allosaurid. And we see again sauropod dinosaurs of various things, but a lot of these dinosaurs are known from only a single specimen, and in some cases it's only a single bone, and so it's really hard to kind of piece this together. So as we've kind of gone through these sites, like North America and Asia has a wealth of dinosaur material. South America and Africa, quite a lot of dinosaur material. Australia, Antarctica, India, Madagascar, a lot less dinosaur material. But dinosaurs are found on all 7 continents and known throughout almost all the entire Mesozoic, all after the late Triassic. So that's all we got for today. Hope you enjoyed that. And I will see you next time for the very last class. So goodbye.